in my personal research, I have found that the prenatal environment in the first 7 years of a person's life sets the foundational stage for the way a person will live the rest of their life. Do you know anything about the environment your mother was in while she was pregnant with you? If so, would you say the environment was toxic? And after you were born, would you say that the most traumatic experiences happened to you within the first 7 years? And if so, do you feel those situations are the main reasons you have become a narcissist? And are you open to sharing any of those situations that caused you to disconnect from your identity and create a false self?
I know very little about the environment that my mother was in whilst she was pregnant with me. So I wouldn't be able to say precisely what the nature of that environment was at the time. I understand that she had a difficult relationship with her father, so I suspect that there was some degree of toxicity there, but it's not something that's been talked about extensively. In terms of after, when I was born, the most traumatic experiences happened to me within the first 9 years of my life. And I've come to learn that those situations are indeed the main reasons why I am what I am now. I didn't know that until I engaged with the good doctors. They are the ones that have enabled me to link what happened to me as a child with the creation of what I've become. I recognized that I took certain proactive actions when I was younger in order to try and change the course of the way that I was treated, by identifying the methodology that my primary abuser, which was my mother, used, and decided that since she gained such respect and fear and admiration from all around her, that rather than try to fight against it or to be crushed under it, it seemed to me to be entirely appropriate to mimic the way that she behaved. And I've come to realize now that my mimicking of her was essentially then the catalyst for what I have become. In terms of the actual situations that caused me to disconnect from my identity, I would prefer not to go into the detail of them, but I will say that during my childhood I was subjected to physical, emotional and sexual abuse, but I have since learned to conquer those abuses.
Happy New Day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and watching. I have been feeling guilty about a situation that happened in 1995. And this situation is really important for me to talk about because I have gained a lot of clarity and understanding about a lot of things from my past through this particular situation. In 1995, my father had a heart attack. And I remember how I felt when my father had a heart attack. And based on how I felt and how I thought I was supposed to feel, it created guilt inside of me because I didn't understand why I felt the way that I did. And it haunted me for a long time, clearly. I recently have gained a lot of clarity and understanding as to why I felt the way that I did. The night that my father had a heart attack, he woke me and my mother up and basically said, we have to go to the hospital right now. So he knew that he was having a heart attack. And I remember riding in the back seat with him and just I didn't know what was going on, but I just remember just being there, and he was in pain, and I didn't understand. And when we got to the hospital, they put him in a wheelchair and rolled him away. And we waited, I don't know how long, and then a doctor came out to talk to me and my mother. And the doctor said, you all came just in time, because if you were a few minutes later, he probably wouldn't have made it. And he expressed that my father had a heart attack. And I didn't even think, but what came out of my mouth, it just flew out. I asked the doctor, is he gonna die? And I said it in a way that it was not compassionate. It was not out of concern. It was a hope for freedom. And the doctor looked at me and he said, no, he's not going to die. And I said, oh, okay. And I don't really remember too much after that. I just know we were in the hospital for a few more hours. But my father stayed in the hospital for a few days. And I admit that the few days that he was in the hospital were the best few days of my childhood. It was the only time that I felt free of a suffocating cloud of tension that I grew up in. And I didn't realize that I was in this cloud of tension until I got a break from it. And that break was when my father had his heart attack. I remember being in elementary school, and a lot of my classmates only had one parent. And they talked about wishing that they had both parents in the same household. And I just remember always thinking, I wish that it was just me and my mother. And that was another thing that I kind of felt guilty about. But I realized that as a child, I just didn't understand. I didn't have any conscious awareness as to why I felt the way that I felt. I just knew that I felt it. And if you're born into a situation that is filled with tension and filled with restrictions, you don't really know exactly what's going on until you disconnect from that energy. And the relief that I felt the few days that my father was in the hospital after his heart attack, my body celebrated. It was happy. My body was happy. And for the first time, I had a friend come over my house and spend the night, and I felt like a regular child growing up for those few days. And it was awesome. It was great. And I enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoyed the peace and the freedom that I felt. And I also realized that it was a break for my mother as well. When my father came back to the house, everything went back to the way that it was. But it's something that I have held on to as guilt because, of course, society and a lot of people would say that it's disrespectful or it's not compassionate or it's uncaring or unloving to think something like that about your parent. And I just never really spoke about it because I never got clarity as to why that feeling was there. That feeling of freedom and happiness came from something detrimental happening to him. I'm doing this video because I have been researching and investigating the many different aspects of narcissism in myself as well as my parents. And I've been researching for over a year now and really understanding what it's about. And what led me onto this path of studying about narcissism and codependency is human design, because human design opened me up to understanding the different behaviors and emotions and characteristics of us as human beings. And human design led me into looking into my parents' blueprints and seeing how their interaction was, how their connection was, and why I grew up seeing certain things between my parents. And I wanted to understand why me and my mother never connected and why we always clashed, and I wanted to understand the relationship between me and my father as well. I learned a lot through looking at their human design blueprints. But when I was guided into narcissism, which was clearly bound to happen, what I started learning about narcissism and psychopathy and sociopathy, I realized that I already had the information stored from studying human design, because the traits and the characteristics that I was coming across for narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths, I already knew those traits and the actual DNA codons that they were linked to based on studying human design blueprints. So that's when things just kind of opened up to a whole new level, and I started going deeper. And I started seeing narcissistic traits that I could relate to. So then I'm looking at my blueprint, trying to see, well, am I a narcissist? Am I a sociopath or a psychopath? And I don't know it. Like, what's going on here? And I realized that narcissism is it's a spectrum. You have extreme narcissists on one side, and then you have empathic and codependent individuals on the opposite end. And then you have, of course, the middle that has a healthy balance of both. So I needed to figure out, where do I fall on this narcissistic spectrum? And one of the things that you'll always see when it comes to narcissism is that narcissists don't have empathy. They don't have compassion. They don't really care about people. And they operate based on mirroring and mimicking emotions and behaviors that deal with love and care and compassion and empathy, but they don't actually possess it. So I was able to place myself on a healthier part of the scale, because empathy is something that has always dominated the way in which I ultimately operate. And it's been times where I felt that I was too empathic. I was too caring and compassionate to the point of degrading myself. So I was able to see that, and then I was also able to see aspects that definitely would be classified as narcissistic, because I do put myself first. I do understand that, and I understand it more now than ever before, because the way in which I would operate in the past, I would always move according to my own way of thinking, but then I would always get sidetracked based on connecting with other people, and I would kind of forget about myself and then like put all of my focus and attention on somebody else until I was completely drained, and then I would have to disconnect and then run away and like rebuild my energy. And in doing that, I didn't have the capacity to care for another person. So I always had that type of pattern in my life. So I looked into that, and I really wanted to know if that's bad narcissism or bad narcissistic or unhealthy narcissistic traits. And I was able to see that it's not. It's just that I was going from a healthier balance to completely disconnecting from my needs, which would always make me teeter in between that healthy balance and then like allowing myself to be drained and depleted. And then I would have to become more focused on myself in order to regain my energy. So I never stayed balanced the way that healthy narcissism or narcissistic traits operate in a person. So in learning all of this, it has helped me a lot. It has helped me a lot to just be realistic about the fact that narcissism and codependency is built into our DNA matrix. Every human being on the planet is a part of this DNA matrix, and is many different aspects of our DNA that if a person is operating more in detriment, then they're going to have more toxic levels of narcissism or more toxic levels of codependency. So being able to face that and be realistic and just acknowledge like, okay, what are my narcissistic traits? What are my codependent traits? What are my empathic traits? How can I find a healthy balance to all of these characteristics so that I'm not on the extreme end of either one? Once I got clear in my design and my traits, I started looking into my dad's traits, because in the list of questions and characteristics that you would ask and look for to see if somebody is a narcissist or highly narcissistic, my father was passing the test. Like, all of the things that I was reading, I was just like, wow, like this is my dad. And I remember things that he told me when I was a child that made it very clear that he had a rough childhood. He did not have respect for women. His mother was not a loving, caring mother to him. And he dealt with a lot before he even became a teenager. And I just started putting things together from what I could remember. Memories were getting triggered. All different pieces of information that I've gathered throughout my life were just like popping up to show me something bigger. And I came to the conclusion that if my father was to be diagnosed, he would definitely be some level of a narcissist. Probably on the lower scale, the lower end of narcissism, but he definitely would have been in the category. When I realized this, a memory came up that I had kind of forgot about. When I was in my early teenage years, there were some gangbangers who were running from the police. And they dropped their bag of guns in our bushes. And my father saw what happened. So he went outside and took their bag of guns. One of the gangbangers saw him take the bag of guns. And they came to the house. My father had me answer the door. And when I opened the door, this guy was very frantic. He was like, "Are your parents home?" And my father was standing behind the door telling me what to say to him. And he's telling me to tell the dude that my parents aren't home. Now, while this was happening, I couldn't register I could not register what was going on. It was just, I was thrown into this situation, and I got this guy standing in front of me who's frustrated. My dad standing behind the door telling me how to respond to this guy. My body is frozen because I'm just so confused. I was just so confused. So I'm telling the guy that they're not here, and he's constantly asking me questions. And like, I'm listening to the questions and then pausing to try to listen to my dad behind the door, and I'm just like really freezing up here. Like, it was it was slightly terrifying. It was not a comfortable situation to be in. But luckily, whatever I said, it made the guy go away. And when I closed the door, my dad was actually frustrated with me. And I feel that that memory was triggered just to show me that when it comes to narcissists, they don't have a conscience. They don't think about the consequences of their actions. They're very impulsive, and they just do. And when I look back on that situation, I'm just like, wow, like there was no way that my father cared about me in that moment. There was no way that he was concerned about my life. And I have all of these questions, you know. Okay, so I'm telling this guy that I'm home alone. He could have easily just like bombarded the door, and who knows what could have happened. Just so many things come to my mind. But in learning about my dad, it has really helped me to clear out a lot of things that I didn't even realize were situations that needed to be cleared out, because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what I was actually dealing with until recently. In wanting to know more about my dad and his past, for the purposes of understanding what made him become one of these people, I started having conversations with my mom. And I started teaching her bits and pieces about what I was learning about narcissism and codependency and the traits and the characteristics and how they operate. And as I would ask my mother questions about my dad, I would take the information and like put it into the question. And the way that my mother was responding to the questions that I was asking, her body was very much in agreement with what I was saying about his narcissistic traits and characteristics. So a lot of information just started to unfold, and together we just started learning more and more and understanding things that she had forgot about, because she knew my father. They knew each other since their early teenage years, and she was able to go back to situations and tell me about them, and then I would be able to take what I learned and then decode the scenarios that she was sharing with me. And for her, she had no idea that he was displaying narcissistic traits and tendencies. So eventually, over time, we were able to just go through the whole timeline that they had together up until the point of my dad finally getting my mom wrapped around his finger and me coming into the picture. And I can see how it was strategically planned for that setup to take place so that my father could be secured with fuel or narcissistic supply. So I was born into a situation to where my mother was narcissistic supply for my father. And I can see how when it came to me and my father's relationship, he saw me as just an extension of him. And when it comes to narcissists, they see people as appliances. They see people as objects and tools to use for the purposes of fuel and narcissistic supply. So there was never any love in my household from either parents, because my mother was wrapped up in his situation. I'm born into it. I don't know what's going on. I just know that these are my parents, and I just knew that I was scared of my dad. And I just knew that my mother didn't have a say-so in the overall decisions made in the house. Even though she supplied all of the energy and took care of everything in the house, and my father didn't do anything. So that was something that I always recognized, and it always made me feel very uncomfortable. And I knew that something was wrong with that. And I knew that the type of man that my father was, I knew that I didn't want to connect with a man like that when I got older. That's what I will always say. And it's so interesting because I finally understand why. I personally do not feel like a victim of narcissistic abuse. I feel like I'm a master student, because even with that type of energy that I grew up in, and the lack of love and caring and compassion that I received from my parents, I somehow made it through. And I think that I turned out to be okay. I think that I'm all right. I know that I still have things to work on, but being a victim, I can't subscribe to that. And I feel good about everything that I've experienced. And I accept the fact that society's versions of the way a family and a household is supposed to be is something that I never have and I never will experience when it comes to me being a child of my parents. I accept that. I've had many years of being resentful towards my parents and not understanding why I didn't receive certain things that I saw other children receiving from their parents. But I'm so grown now, like I can't hold on to it anymore. I can only accept it for what it is and learn from it and empower myself along with other people. My father isn't here. He transitioned 5 years ago. And even if he was still alive, I don't even know if I will be able to talk to him about what I've understood or what I've come to understand. So regardless, it's up to me to face this situation, face these fears, and clear them out. In my studies of narcissism and these different personality disorders, I found many, many sources, and I listened to hours upon hours of videos. I've read a lot of information. I've done a lot of research and investigating for over a year, and I've heard many different perspectives from people who classify themselves as victims, those who are now empowered and teaching people about narcissism and how to spot them and avoid them or get away from them, and also people who are narcissists themselves. And that's what, for me, was more appealing when it came to my personal research. I could understand the victim's mentality and what they had to express, but I could also feel that for a lot of people, the emotional aspects of what they went through with narcissists had an effect on the way in which they could deliver the information that I needed in order to really get to the foundation and the bottom of why narcissism is what it is. So I just had to go straight to the source. And the first person that I came across who really resonated with me and opened up my eyes to the minds of narcissists was Sam Vaknin. And Sam Vaknin is very well known. He has a very popular book on narcissism. Some people call it the Narcissist Bible. He has a YouTube channel with hundreds of videos. He goes around and does lectures about narcissism and many different personality disorders. So he is a diagnosed narcissist, and he is very much a genius in understanding his own kind and the way in which he breaks down the information in a way that I needed to understand it. It really assisted me in going deeper into the minds of narcissists and why they do what they do. Now, his information is, I know it's a lot of people that can't get into it unless they're really about deep investigation and scientific study, because he's the type of person that is very logical, scientific. You feel like you're in a classroom with him, and he's very straight to the point, and he just gives you the information in a very foundational way, which is what I need. And I gathered a lot from him. A few months after I was studying Sam Vaknin, I came across a guy named H.G. Tudor. Now, some of you all may have seen the preview that I put out, but H.G. Tudor drew me in a whole nother way. And he gave me the other side to the coin of narcissism. He goes deep into helping you understand, but he does it in a way to where he takes you on a journey. He takes you into the different scenes and the different movie scripts that he has experienced in his life as a narcissist sociopath. And the way in which he writes and speaks, it's like you can visualize what he's saying. You can really get it in a way that does have more entertaining aspects behind it, as opposed to Sam Vaknin, who is just, he could be looked at as just too intellectual and too boring. But both of them were the perfect combination for me to just really get the fullness of understanding narcissism. With H.G. Tudor, I came across 2 interviews that he did. And when I listened to those interviews, this very, very strong energy came over me. And I know that it was my inner guidance, it was my body letting me know, respond to what you're listening to. And this energy just propelled me to contact him. I knew in that moment that I needed to get him on my platform. Even though I had studied him for hours and I stay up to date with his videos that he puts out and I read his articles, I still had a lot of questions. And I knew that I needed to talk to him. And there was nothing in me that had any resistance. My mind was saying all types of stuff to try to dissuade me from contacting him. But my body, my inner guidance, it was full speed ahead. And I sent him an email, told him what I wanted, told him what I could offer him. And I was prepared to wait for months because I figured, hey, you're a popular guy. You're doing a lot with this. You're gaining hundreds of subscribers by the second. I just figured that it would just be a minute before he got to me. And it was a very quick response. So the interview was set up and I gave myself a month to prepare my questions, go over his material, reflect on my life, reflect on my father's life, my mother's life, and just come up with questions that can help me to understand and also help other people to understand, because I wanted to make sure that the questions that I asked would be questions that other people are wondering about, and questions that, and situations that other people have dealt with when it comes to their own narcissistic situations with people in their lives. So it happened, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life, because